This is Into the Stillness, a short story written by myself. The idea for this comes from River Snyder. When they asked, "Have you ever heard the song Lullaby for a Princess?" Well, I gave it a listen. It's a wonderful song for those of you who also want to give it a listen. And this story will be based off the main idea of that song. Now, without further ado, let's continue into our story. Dust stirred among the wooden floorboards, and Roman sneezed as he ventured deeper into the world of cardboard and old relics. Inspiration had struck in the middle of the night, leaving him with no choice but to search for the one key he knew could clear up his writer's block in no time. A poem. That was all he required, the words of which would fit exactly what he wished to create, though there was one problem. Roman had written said poem years ago, leaving its location deep within the folds of the past. He squinted in the darkness and continued to shuffle forward. The deeper one traveled down the corridor, the farther back in time each relic had been created. If Roman recalled correctly, the poem was at least a decade old, the result of teenage creativity and the random bursts of inspiration that followed. Roman was swallowed whole by the sea of beige as he moved farther down the corridor. Cobwebs hung like lace across oak desks, and feathered pens remained stained dark by drops of ink. His boots clicked against the floorboards, and as he searched with each step, an overwhelming sense of nostalgia filled his core. Swirling around and crashing against his mind in waves, he felt the embrace of quilts from his youth, and longed to indulge in the joys that came from coloring with a fresh set of crayons. Sugary scents filled his nose, and he sighed in the comfort of Patton's old sugar cookie recipe, though the urgency of finding the poem rang true in his mind. Roman couldn't help but wish to exist in the world of his past. From the corner of the space, Roman felt a slight draft. It rustled the dust at his feet, tickling his nose and bringing his attention to a small paper flapping in the breeze. The poem temporarily ignored, he plucked the sheet from where it had been wedged between twin novels and gave it a glance. The paper was a smear of colors, each side carrying that of glitter and stars, while the other held the sharp angles of swords and smudges that seemed to represent blood. Roman stilled as his eyes flickered over the corner of the page. 4 words covered that corner. 4 words so seemingly insignificant, Roman couldn't place why he was filled with a sinking feeling. By Roman and Remus, it read, scribbled in both red and green. 2 colors meant to be opposed, written together in what he had come to call art as a child. Roman gripped the paper tight in his fingers. Had he even tried to remember joys such as this? Had he cared for all the good when he had shut out? No. Roman shook his head, crumpling the paper tight in his fist. The cobwebs coated his fingers, and he dropped the drawing without a second thought. He wasn't ready to face the guilt that followed. Poem again his priority. The prince switched course, away from the boxes filled with toys and broken crayons, but towards those of his later years. The in-between, a land of discovery and the questions that could make or break a child just entering adolescence. An outline emerged within the shadows. Upon closer inspection, Roman discovered it to be his old dresser, the drawers poking out due to how much they had been filled. He did his best to wiggle each drawer open. The mere thought of what could lay inside left his mind spinning, overwhelmed by both the sense of curiosity and nostalgia. Papers brushed past his fingers, worn with coffee stains. Strings poked his fingers, extras left over from learning new instruments and the consequences that came when he became just a little too passionate. Remus always had been one to laugh when he broke a string, though he had also been the first to dry Roman's tears each time. He had told him not to worry as they tuned the instrument, playing something equivalent to screeching just to cheer Roman up. He really was the better one when it came to empathy. Stop it. Roman shut his eyes tight. He replaced the sound of desperate pleas with the hum of music, reflected in the strings he had somehow spun round his fingers. The cold metal grounded him, and Roman took a deep breath. Poem. He was looking for the poem. Roman slammed the drawer shut. He urged his feet to move on, dragging along the floor while time seemed to fade past his vision. The prince wasn't sure where he was now, but did it matter? The corridor seemed to be more of a circle than a line. His memories blurred until he wasn't sure what was past and what was present, who he was and who he had been. Eyes darting back and forth, Roman forced the air back into his lungs, if only to drown out the pounding in his brain. Deep breaths, and the guilt was gone. Deep breaths, and he could forget about the look on Remus's face, the shine to his eyes as walls crumbled into mere dust. Monster. He wasn't sure who the word applied to anymore. Roman didn't wish to find out. A small shriek escaped his lips, and he stumbled to the ground. Too caught up in his own thoughts, he had failed to notice the light left lonely on the floor. He kneeled down to pick up the device, and with the flick of a switch, it again shone bright. Stars speckled the shadows, drawing a sigh from Roman's throat. It had been too long since he had felt the same aquamarine glow of its light, the result of Remus bursting into his room in the middle of the night. Through choked whispering, Remus had explained his nightmare, burrowing deeper into Roman's covers when he couldn't bear to spare any more details. Young Roman, unsure what to do, had waved his hand, summoning the closest thing to the night sky he could muster. Stars had always been Remus's favorite. He had finally glanced up to see the thousands of lights, and with a voice the smallest Roman had ever heard, he had told him everything. For that night, Remus had realized he was being torn apart from the inside out, not by any disease, nor the curse of some dragon witch, but by his own thoughts. Roman hated the fact that while he had nodded and whispered quiet reassurances, he secretly had feared his twin. After all, if Remus could be corrupted by nothing other than his own mind, what would have stopped him from hurting the others? Excuses. Sharp, the words stung Roman's mind, and he set the nightlight back onto the floor. Away he ran before he could be swallowed by its glow, the shadows now more of a comfort than what came with realization. Round and round until the prince lost his sense of direction, Roman moved. He forced his feet forward, again and again, trying to drill what mattered into his brain. Poem. He needed the poem, the inspiration, the key to what had slipped from his fingers. The poem, the writing, his creation, his decision. It had been his choice, his fault. A glint of light caught Roman's eye. He rushed over to the space, met with the sight of a lone cardboard box. Something clicked within him, and before he even checked, he knew it was the one. Roman pushed open the flaps and dove inside, a mess of notebooks and broken pencils meeting him. Frantic, he ventured closer. The years passed and scribbled titles, his handwriting transforming from scribbles to the brilliant loops he now used within his notes. Roman, age 7. Roman, age 12. Roman, age 15. His finger pricked the corner of something sharp. Roman winced and drew back before catching the sight of a golden frame. He plunged his hand into the cardboard box and returned with the picture, concealed beneath dusted glass. With a gentle brush of his thumb, the image became clear. Roman's gasp rang through the corridor, caused by the sight of one he hadn't seen in years. Arms were around shoulders and a bright smile on both faces. He glanced at the image of him and his twin. The click of the shutter still rang in his mind, for only hours later. "What did you do?" "It's not a big deal, Ro. I'm fine." "I say otherwise," Roman exclaimed, gesturing frantically to the shadow that wrapped around his twin's shoulders. This thing isn't normal. I'm not even sure how you found it." Remus frowned. "I didn't find it. I made it. And when did you get the right to criticize my creations?" He flinched as the shadow wrapped tighter around his form, though twisted his grimace into a wicked smile. "Please don't pretend this isn't hurting you." Roman stepped forward, his voice growing softer. "Just months ago, you said stuff like this made you afraid." He reached out towards the shadow, though Remus slapped his hand away. "Well, maybe I'm not afraid anymore. Have you ever thought of that? I'm not some failure, Roman. I can handle myself." "I never said..." "Yeah? Well, I bet you've thought about it. I see the way you look at me, how you hate it every time I add my input," Remus hissed. "You won't even let me help you anymore. Too scared I'll ruin your perfect little world." "It's not like that. You can just be a bit abrasive sometimes. I didn't want things to go too far." "Because that's what I am, huh? A villain who can't control his own mind, so much that his own brother is afraid." "I'm not afraid." Remus thrust forward, stopping inches from Roman's face. Roman flinched before he could stop himself, his hand already tight around his sword. Remus's expression fell. "Exactly what I thought." The shadow swirled tighter around him. Remus was becoming a blur of darkness amidst himself. Roman took a deep breath, steeling himself against his brother's glare. "I can't pretend anymore. Remus, you're dangerous, and as much as you deny it, you're losing control." "Liar!" he snapped, and the shadow wrapped around his arms, coiling endlessly. "It's that shadow, your creations," Roman said. "Don't you see how you're not just frightening to the world, but you're a danger to yourself?" "And what are you going to do about it? Pretend I don't exist? Leave me alone so you can pretend we never were the same?" "I'm going to stop you before both of us are no more." Remus blanched, and the shadow swallowing his form faltered. "What?" "This is for your own good," Roman whispered. "I'll see you again in time, but I can't just sit and watch you destroy yourself and all we've ever worked for." Remus stumbled back. "You wouldn't. Please, bro, I'm fine." Roman shut his eyes tight and held his hands outstretched. Through shaky breaths, he whispered, "I'll miss you." A burst of light erupted from his hands, and Remus screamed, the shadow falling away from his form and shriveling into nothing. His knees buckled until he was doubled over, grasping at the light that swarmed around his crumpled form. "Roman, stop!" he cried, eyes widened as the tips of his fingers began to fade. Roman ignored the pleas, focusing on the power pulsing through his veins. This was the only solution, the only way, he told himself. Remus cried out again, fading faster as he was swallowed in a scarlet glow, though Roman knew he wouldn't disappear. He was merely being transferred, moved to a place where he could harm no more, all until the land had regained balance and the darkness was banished. "Roman!" Remus's eyes shone, the last feature the prince saw before there was nothing before him but that dwindling flicker of light. "The only way," he whispered as he crumpled to the floor. It was the only way. Roman's fingers loosened around the picture frame, sending it careening towards the floor. The shatter of glass was the only thing to wake him from his thoughts, and it was then that the prince broke into sobs. He sank to the floor, ignoring the shards that sliced his palms as he leaned against the cardboard box. Beneath the broken frame, the image was finally set free. Roman plucked it from the wreckage with tears lining his cheeks, gasping as he caught sight of what lay on the back. Scribbled behind the image was a poem. The poem. With fingers gripping the picture like a lifeline, Roman read, glancing up to the stars in hopes that Remus could still hear him. Fate has been cruel and order unkind. How can I have sent you away? The blame was my own, the punishment yours. The harmony's silent today. This has been Into the Stillness. Thank you again to River Snyder for leaving the request about that song. The last line in which the poem comes from is actually some lyrics from that song, so if you so feel inclined, go ahead and check it out. It's a pretty cool one. And now, thank you to all of you who are listening, and I will see you next time for another story.